Today we're going to make baguettes, but we're going to make it using a pre-ferment, and this pre-ferment is going to be a Poolish. So in preparation for doing that, we're going to end up having to mix this and then let it ferment over a certain period of time. This is actually recorded the day before because what I want to do is be able to show you what it's going to look like now and then the stages that it ferments over until tomorrow. So a Poolish is the same amount of flour and the same amount of water and a small percentage of yeast. The attribute to what it's going to give to the baguette itself is giving a little bit more extensibility, so ability to kind of stretch into a longer shape without having as much elasticity, the ability to kind of retract on itself. It's also going to help with more open cell structure, and then obviously flavor. Okay, so we're going to end up, this is 30% of the overall flour weight, okay, and the same amount of water, and then a small pinch of yeast. And in doing this, like I said, it's going to ferment overnight, approximately like 14 to 16 hours, and it's going to give a very, almost like a sweet smell and flavor, and it'll transcend in the baguette, and you will be extremely satisfied with making that baguette. As I mentioned, it's only going to be a very, very, very small amount of yeast, so I'm actually just going to put a little bit in here. And it's literally just a pinch, all right? Since it's going to ferment for such a long period of time, you really, really do not need a whole lot. And this now, like I said, is 447 grams of water, 447 grams of flour that I'll scale into here. I'm going to mix the water and the yeast together first. Just to make sure that it's all in there. And it's not really going to dissolve yet a whole lot, but if you mix it together. The water was at about 62 degrees to 65 degrees. Again, I'm in Florida, so the overall temperature in the air is probably around 70 to 75 in the house. And since it is going to ferment overnight, I don't want it to go too fast, and it's going to create this nice flavor. So like I said, it's between about 62 to 65 degrees that I scaled it off. All right, so now I need to clear it to 0 again. Okay, actually it was. Okay, so now we have our 447 grams of flour, 447 grams of water, our little pinch of yeast, and we're just going to mix this as such. You can use your hand or the spoon, but all we're really doing is, it's not mixing a dough in any respect. It is just getting this hydrated and then making sure that all of it is combined. So again, just make sure that all of the flour is hydrated. You're not actually developing any gluten or anything of that nature by the mixing process. And since it is the same amount of water, same amount of flour, it's going to be very liquidy as such. So what we have is this right here, consistent. This is likely to, it's going to at least double to almost triple now. Okay. So it'll literally be at the top. When it does, it's going to have lots of bubbles that are inside it, and you'll see it kind of doming and then slightly retracting. All right, so yesterday what we did was mix the Poolish that is going to now be incorporated into the final dough, the rest of the dry ingredients, and obviously the water. And for the overall formula, we had a 2,500 gram total dough weight. All right, it was 100% flour, 65% water, 2% salt, and 0.7% yeast, instant yeast. We took out 30% of the flour, and then the same amount of water, a little pinch of yeast, let that ferment overnight. So that was 447 grams of flour, 447 grams of water, and again, just like it's a little less than a gram of yeast. This had been mixed just by hand. Actually, I used a spoon. and it was allowed to ferment. We're at about 16 hours right now, right? So as I mentioned, it would have doubled, if not even come close to tripling in volume. And you want to get it at its peak, which means it's going to be starting to dome, and then when it domes and it starts to recede ever so slightly, that's when it's ready. Mine actually went all the way up to the very top of the container, and thankfully I did put it on a plate, because if I just keep this going, it will continue to ferment and overflow. What I want to do is just show. All right, and you can see how nicely this fermented. It has an absolutely fantastic smell, aroma. And it's going to add a tremendous amount of flavor, plus it's going to have some physical dough characteristics that's going to allow it to be easier for baguettes, where it's going to be extensible, so when we're shaping, it's going to be able to stretch much easier than something that's a little bit more tight and a little bit different physical characteristics. So what we're going to do is, with our mixing bowl, take the Poolish, see how nice and lively that is? All right. Now this is the scaled water, which is 523 grams. Best way to kind of clean out your container, just pour that in there. And then all you got to do is just kind of scrape down your container, and you'll get 99% of everything out. Okay. It's always very common in bakeries to do. Okay. Excellent. All right, so you can see the water in the Poolish. All right, we're going to add dry. I'm going to actually use the same container to ferment the dough. Got the yeast. Okay, so flour is at about 1,400 or 1,043 grams. Yeast about 9 grams. And then the salt at 30 grams. All right, put this on the mixer, and then if you remember, make sure you've got it locked in on both sides here, and then you're going to push it down and to the little clip that's behind. If you don't do that, it may shake the bowl and even come off. And again, put your dough hook on, turn it to make sure that this is also locked in and solid. Lift up your bowl, and then keep it at a low speed in the beginning. The water temperature was at about 65 degrees. There's going to be some friction and temperature that's going to come from both the Poolish, also the flour temperature and the room temperature itself, and then the friction of the mixer. We're still looking for approximately 75, even on up to about 77 degrees at the most. So you give it a range of between 73 to 77 degrees is good for baguettes. All right, so it's going through our pickup stage. Just starting to bring it together. Okay, so you can see it as it's picking up. This has been about 2 minutes. I'm going to continue to let it incorporate for another probably 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'll go into second speed to start to develop the dough. Okay, so our dough's been mixing in first speed or low speed for about 7 minutes total. You can see that it's fully incorporated, and now what we're going to do is go into a higher speed, what we just call our second speed, which is going to be the development of the dough, so the strengthening. It's going to stretch and pull to overlap the gluten strands so it gets stronger and stronger. So we're just going to increase that up. Okay. And then this is going to run for about 2 to 3 minutes at most. All right, our dough finished mixing. What we did was about 7 minutes in first speed, low speed, around 2 or so on a KitchenAid mixer. And then I moved it up to about 6 to 7 as a second speed to develop the dough. And that was at about 3 minutes, right? This is, I never on these KitchenAid mixers try to go to full development because they tend to destroy the dough or it also creates too much heat. So often what I'll do is mix it just slightly less, and then I'll give it a little bit of a fold, if necessary, on the bench. This is a slightly lower hydration than the straight dough baguette or straight dough bread that we made the other day, and so it's going to be a little bit stiffer. And you can see it in pretty good shape, right? So I said it's not 100% developed, and that's intended as such. And what we're going to do, just give it a light fold, very similar to what we had done before. And then just kind of bring all this together and just put it in your proofing container. All right. I'm going to check my dough temperature, which is essential. And we're at 77 degrees. I'm at the high end, and I need to be thoughtful about where this would lead if I did not get that. But it's going to ferment for anywhere from 50 minutes to about an hour, maybe even an hour and 10 minutes. It's my room temperature is pretty warm today. It's about 75 degrees. So I'm going to check this kind of at the lower minute side, and then we'll see this, but it'll come very close to doubling in size as well. So we've allowed our dough to ferment, and it's been about an hour and 10 to 15 minutes or so. Pretty happy with the way it looks. You can see that it has, for the most part, doubled in volume. You can even see kind of where this has created a lot of gas. And when you open the lid, you'll actually start to understand what we talked about on aromas. And this, as compared to a straight dough, which we did in a prior video, this now has a tremendous amount of fermentation. We were able to ferment 30% of the flour overnight, 16 hours approximately. And now an additional hour and 20 minutes in the bulk fermentation. It's much lighter, much airier, and it smells fantastic. So what we're going to do is take a little bit of dusting flour just to kind of ease it out, and we're going to divide these. We have to do a pre-shape prior to shaping. So just take your scraper and just kind of loosen it up. So what you can see is it's much more lively than what a straight dough is, and it has a lot more just kind of overall gas and definitely flavor. So. All right, so we're going to turn the scale on, and I'm going to scale in grams still, but what we are going to do is about 7 ounces to 200, it's about 200 grams. And then also we're going to shape these out to around 15 inches. Reason being I can only do 15 inches is because that's the depth of the oven. You can't really load a baguette sideways, so we can maximize this at about 15-inch amount. But if you were to do a traditional baguette, let's say what you would do at the competition, the Coupe du Monde, Generally, those are going to be at 250 grams total weight, which is about 9 ounces, and anywhere from 50 to 55 centimeters, which ranges around 20 to 22 and a half inches, right? This, like I said, we have to adjust to our oven. We are baking at home, so, you know, this will still be just fine. All right, so my scale's in grams, and I'm going to scale this at 200 grams approximately. Again, you can be smart when you're dividing your dough and kind of cut it into a strip, all right? And then cut off pieces. And again, don't cut directly on the scale itself because you can hurt yourself, all right? So that's 200 grams. So let that sit here. All right, 200 grams. If you have more than one piece, why don't you lay it down on the opposite side so those pieces start to come together before you're ready to pre-shape. Okay, so we finished dividing the dough itself. We had 2,500 grams of dough, divided into 200 grams each as an individual piece. It's a little bit less than what you would normally do for a baguette, but you know, like I said, since the oven is smaller, I'm going to have to adjust the size of the baguette to what we're going to end up doing. But we have to pre-shape these first, and so if it was sitting like this, just flip it over. Okay, only a light amount of flour is necessary. We're going to kind of put it into a little log. All right, that's it. It's only going to sit like this. And it's a very simple pre-shape. We're not doing anything other than just kind of folding it over itself so that we can get this in a position that when we do shape, it's going to be much more successful. All right. So we had a chance to not only pre-shape, but let them relax approximately 15 minutes. It's going to give us a chance to just very lightly shape the breads by allowing them to relax. Now, as I said, these are smaller than a traditional baguette, and all that we are going to have is just our little log here, okay? Just a light bit of flour. This is our proofing couche. It's made out of like a kind of a flax linen, and they'll proof just easily. So very similar to what we did before. We're going to fold over. I like to kind of use my thumbs to press in. Okay, and now we have our little bit additional log. Start with one hand in the middle. All right, and then you're going to start to, with even pressure from all fingers at once, so you can keep the baguette itself even. Okay, and then you're just going to kind of taper it a little bit at the ends. All right, and that's really it. So a lot of people will proof these either the seam side up and do so to let it dry out a little bit here, or you can even dust and put flour on the couche so you can have a kind of a floured top to it. And then what we're going to do is just give a little fold here. And we're just going to keep going through our baguettes. You don't want to spend too much time doing it. And honestly, the least amount you put pressure on this and the least amount of movement, the better. If there's a little bit of stickiness, you can just kind of run it through a little flour. But you don't want too much because then it starts to slide all over. All right, so we just keep doing this. If you did a really good job, it's hard to see the seam. Okay. Kind of push it away from you. As I said, you can kind of use your thumbs. If there's a little bit of tackiness, it's easier and best to just do that, roll it through. But I always leave this area without flour because, as I said, they will start to dry out and slide, and it makes it much more difficult to shape this out. All right. There we are. So what we're going to do is go through each of the baguettes, and I'm going to continue to put them on here. These are going to proof approximately, again, 50 minutes or so, maybe up to an hour and 10 minutes. Our baguettes had a chance to proof. It's been about an hour and 5 minutes or so. And if you look at these, to test proof, they've had a chance to obviously expand, but then what you want to do with your hand or your finger, you give a slight indentation there, and if it starts to slowly expand out and leave a slight indentation, as there is right here, okay, and you'll see it on the side as well. All right, so for us to be able to load these baguettes, as I've done in the prior video, I used a sheet pan with a little dusting flour on the top here so it slides off. We've had the proofing couche that has been able to proof these. This is a really nice one that I was able to find online. And then a transfer peel, right? You can't, or you can, but it would not be advisable, especially if it's a full-length baguette, to pick up a loaf of baguette while it's proofed. So we use what's called a transfer peel. Instead of buying this online, I actually got at a hardware store, bought it for $3, cut it, sanded it, and it's much easier to do it that way. And then we're also going to need our lame, our scoring blade. All right. So to do so, just going to hold your transfer peel, pull back the baguette couche, and this is the seam up, if you remember. So let's first do this. If these are just even slightly tacky, just to make sure that you're not going to be stuck to anything, just do that. All right. We have a nice little proofed baguette. All right. Same here. Now we only have space in an oven of this size. I can do 4, maybe 6 across. I'm going to do 4 right now. What's essential, though, is that we're going to score our bread, load it, steam it, and then do it again a second time on the other side of the oven. And when you're scoring a baguette, what's very essential, we're going to do only 3 scores on this because of the size of the bread. Generally, it's anywhere from 5 or 6, sometimes 7, depending on the length. But you want it at a relatively flat angle. You're only going to use about the top quarter to top third of the tip of the blade, all right? And you're going to just kind of give a little sliver into it. And it's going to be at a diagonal like this, not across too much and not down the line nearly as much. Just slight angle coming across like this. All right? And so if you can see, they overlap. It's going to be about a third each. You want to try to keep it within what I call the shoulders. So each score starts and ends within that shoulder. All right? And it's just going to be that little flap that's going to come up like this. All right, so we'll do the same here. The speed at which you do it is always what's helpful. And then we're going to load this into the oven. All right. A little bit of steam for right now. And we will steam more when we load this second set of baguette. But you want to go fast, controlled speed actually is what I should say. If it flipped over, flip it back, and then over, and all you do is just kind of lightly, gently bring it off. Okay? The rest will load after this. And since I didn't catch it in the beginning, I can go back. Not a big issue. When you're loading it, also you're trying to do that with quite a bit of speed. right. Now that's going to fill the oven with steam. It's going to be able to envelop up and over the bread. It's going to help to allow the bread to expand properly over the first few minutes, and then the crust will begin to set and the steam will evaporate. All right. All right, so we had a chance to load and bake all of our baguettes, and they turned out quite nice. These are not a full-length baguette. This would be what you would pretty much call a demi-baguette. They're about 13, 14 inches, and I'm pretty satisfied with them. The steam on these had turned out quite nice. There's a nice golden color to these, and you can see that the scores have opened up nicely. And they've pretty much done what they're supposed to do. I did have one baguette that did not receive as much steam as the other, and it's a good example to show what it means when you don't have steam and why we need to do it. Okay, if you can notice on this, it's a much duller color, and its just overall appearance is very flat. It didn't get that nice golden shine, and that's indicative of a lack of steam. It had enough to expand and baked actually fairly well, but I'm a little disappointed on that. But the rest of the baguettes have done nicely. And if you noticed, we were able to put 3 scores on. Normally it's about 5 on up to 7 on a full-length baguette. But satisfied overall, and it's really just about as simple as it is. We make a pre-ferment the night before. Mix it, doesn't take much on mixing, let it ferment. Shaping takes a little bit of practice, but not a whole lot. And then eventually scoring and loading does, but that will come with practice. Just remember to keep your scores within the shoulder of the bread and at a diagonal, and they overlap at about 1/3 each score, all right? So I'd like to say thank you for watching our video, and again, subscribe to the channel. There's going to be more and more videos that are going to be coming. It's going to get more complicated, and so the first several videos are starting to lay a foundation. The next video, what you're going to see is a breakdown of what baker's percent is, and a relatively simple explanation as to what it is, but it's very much necessary to understand when we start to make other breads. And then I hope to go into another video after that about ingredients, and then bring it back to building up sourdoughs, and then going into sourdough bread making. All right? So I'd like to say thank you, and if you would like to follow any of these videos or other references, you can see us at kingdombread-tampa.com.